I'm not a real wolf. But if I was, would it be the wolf that expressed itself through my music? I appear to be a man. Is he the creator of the sounds I make? Because if I look closely into the mirror, I can also see myself as a woman. Could she be the source of the emotions that I emit through my chosen frequencies? Or is it the work of a child, hidden deep within, desperately screaming for attention, afraid of being abandoned? Maybe it's all of these things. The eye in the triangle, the innocent spirit at play with the masculine and feminine forces of the universe, causing oscillations that create something out of nothing. Human expression resonating into crystallized sound, creating the world as we know it. I will probably never know, but whatever the source is, I will not be quiet. When I first started working on this project, I set out to investigate correspondences between frequency and geometry in order to build an alphabet that could be used as a platform for creating new musical and audiovisual works. How scientific of me. Physical phenomenon caused by sound had already fascinated me for a period of time, especially the field of cymatics, where one can create geometric patterns in grains of sand by applying different sound frequencies to the surface that they reside on. These ideas resonated with me in that my entire journey of expressing myself through music had mostly focused on the physicality of sound. Earth-shattering bass sequences and subsonic kick drums played through enormous sound systems at levels that makes it close to a miracle that I have never had any problems with my hearing or any trace of tinnitus. The notion that I could change the shape of the physical world with sound felt like a great opportunity to make actual change through my choice of expression. Maybe I could finally become the sonic activist I had always dreamt of being, or a supervillain obtaining world domination by discovering a secret sound weapon. These were also emerging ideas in the field of music I was part of at the time, with artists like Alexi Perala and Grant Wilson Claridge launching their Colundi sequence, a scale of frequencies that they wouldn't tell you much about, but insisted would have transformational effects on the listener. Artists like Richard James, aka Aphex Twin, had long been exploring microtonal music in his work. And then there were some rather questionable theories, such as the 432 Hz myth, where it was insisted that the middle A should be tuned to 432 instead of the normative 440 Hz, in order to resonate more naturally with humanity and nature. Some were even suggesting that the 440 tuning was an evil conspiracy launched in order to create imbalance in the world. I find it rather funny how we humans always search for hidden meaning and delegation of responsibility for our collective actions. whether we believe the hidden forces behind them are evil or benevolent. But this material pulled me further into the more alternative compartments of the internet. And I soon found myself diving into theories on how sound is linked to creation myths in various fields of mysticism and spirituality. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, the Christian creation myth states. Yahweh is a sound. Everything is vibration, Hindu teachings suggest. Their word is Brahman, Aum. The ancient Egyptians believed that the god Thot created the world by voice alone. The Laguna Pueblo natives have probably water and the following creation story. In the center of the universe, she sang. In the midst of the waters, she sang. In the midst of heaven, she sang. In the center, she sang. Her singing made all the worlds, the worlds of the spirits, the worlds of the people, the worlds of the creatures, the worlds of the gods. In this way, she separated the quarters. Singing, she separated. Upon the face of heaven, she placed her song. Upon the face of water, she placed her song. Thus, she placed her song. Thus, she placed her will. Thus, wove she her design. Thus sang the spider. Thus she thought. Finally, a myth where the creator is a she, but more about that later. At this point in my research, I would follow any lead to any new information I stumbled across. No restrictions, nothing could be too weird, freely flowing, non-judgmental, and it felt great. But at one point, my head was so filled with information that I no longer knew what I was researching. All I knew was that I was inspired to make music, write, take photographs, go for walks, inspired to create in order to ventilate the information that filled me to the brim. And for the first time in my life, getting a monthly salary for doing it. Woo! Two seemingly coincidental events happened about a year into this turmoil of trying to make my own head explode. The first one was that the year 2020 was the 30th anniversary of my artist alias Mental Overdrive. I chose that name for a reason, by the way. The second incident was that during a seminar at the Tromsø Art Academy, one of the professors confronted me with the fact that my project was totally stripped of any personal angle. Interesting material, but I cannot see the artist in all this, she said. Which to me was the most intriguing and most honest feedback anyone had given me up to that point, and maybe throughout the whole project. Thanks, Hannah. It was good because it was totally true. My artistic career had always been about hiding in a shady corner behind a couple of record players or a stack of synthesizers and drum machines. No lights on me. A safe spot where I could unleash my sonic attacks on people in dark clubs without risking any repercussions. Except for the odd request for a very bad piece of music or someone trying to buy a drink from me as they thought I was the bartender. I immediately decided to take up the challenge of getting personal, albeit with a twist. Personal sounds one-dimensional to me, like looking at something from a fixed set of coordinates in the universe. Why be this narrow when there are so many interesting viewpoints? And as a three-dimensional being, one can move around and see things from different angles, which appears far less claustrophobic to me. And there might be more than 3 dimensions to explore, as this animation of a tesseract illustrates, a 4-dimensional cube presented as a 3-dimensional model on a 2-dimensional screen. I had to get to work I decided to start this personalization process of my project by taking a closer look at who I really was, or who I had imagined myself to be up to this point in life. And I saw no better way than to use the 30th anniversary of my artist career to do this. I had gathered a lot of memorabilia over the years, stuffed in cardboard boxes named shit for sorting 1, 2, and 3. There were posters, flyers, record reviews, and interviews, etc., and dead flies. At first glance, it just appeared as noise to me. The past has never been my thing. I had always been about moving forward, and I was of the opinion that if we humans were meant to look behind us, we would have been born with eyes in the back of our heads. But now I was forced to take a closer look at my own past, and it all appeared somehow alien to me. I started thinking, what if I'd never met this guy? Who would I think he was if I didn't know him? And who would others imagine this person to be, judging from the traces that he had left behind in the world? What did his life look like from the vantage point of someone who knew nothing but the tip of the iceberg, coupled with a common set of prejudices? Of course, he would have taken a lot more drugs than I ever did, being a techno musician, right? Of course, his lifestyle would have been far more hedonistic than mine, no? And of course, his tendency to speed off into the future without looking back were the actions of a man who took what he wanted from life, whatever risk involved. In that last prospect, I could slightly recognize my real self. So I decided to start writing his story from an imagined external perspective in order to find out more about him. An autobiography about an imaginary me. This was the start of what eventually turned into the text work, Pyramids on the Moon. I also decided to start making music, pretending to be this guy. Yin and Yang is a Chinese philosophical concept that describes opposite but interconnected forces. In Chinese cosmology, the universe creates itself out of a primary chaos of material energy, organized into the cycles of yin and yang, and formed into objects and lives. Yin is the receptive and yang is the active principle, seen in all forms of change and difference, such as the annual cycle, the landscape, sexual coupling, the formation of both men and women as characters, and socio-political history. The more the story about the imagined me in a parallel universe developed, the more it struck me how macho this guy appeared to be, or wanted to appear. He had definitely been living in a man's world most of his life. And however much I exaggerated, he was still too much like the self I imagined was my real one. The shadow is a concept first coined by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung that describes those aspects of the personality that we choose to reject and repress. For one reason or another, we all have parts of ourselves that we don't like. or that we think society won't like. So we push those parts down into our unconscious psyches. It is this collection of repressed aspects of our identity that Jung referred to as our shadow self. My digging into the past also revealed other, more surprising items. One day I found some old pictures of myself at 17 years of age, and the I in the picture appeared a very different figure than the one I've come across as since. He was a youth who looked and dressed very androgynous, wearing makeup every day, and emphasizing the feminine features of his being more than I have ever done as a grown man. As I took a closer look at his taste in music, I also discovered that he listened to far more melodic and emotionally charged music than the music I had been listening to over the last 30 years, with favorites among artists like Joy Division, The Cure, Depeche Mode, and the Cocteau Twins, to name a few. Music I had forgotten about. I started wondering what the life of this fragile goth might have looked like had he not been interrupted by the world of fast beats in fast cars, surrounded by a brotherhood of men, real men who knew what they liked and how they should behave, which was the reality of the early days of the techno scene I was part of, I'm afraid. A reality that never made me 100% comfortable. So I decided to start writing a different story in a second parallel universe, where I had embraced rather than abandoned these other aspects of myself, in order to get a clearer idea of who I could have been. The way this other character created a counterbalance to the boyish techno fiend was intriguing and appealed to me in a big way. I had found my yin to the previous yang. As I went along imagining this different life through writing, I also started wondering what kind of music this person would have created had he been allowed to live. One day, I discovered a cassette tape recorded sometimes in the mid-80s. I have a lot of recordings lying about. Shit for sorting 1, 2, and 3. On one of the old tracks, I found I could hear vocals from somebody I couldn't recognize. However much I squeezed my brain to remember all the sporadic collaborations and bands that I'd been part of in my youth. But eventually, it dawned on me that the voice I heard was my own. I also started dabbling with the simple AI processing algorithms that were emerging around the same time. And as always, when I find new technology, thinking, what can I use this for? Probably better things than asking it to depict Björn Torske riding a pig. One day, while I was playing around with these image processing algorithms, I stumbled across some gender transformation filters. And by accident, I could suddenly visualize myself as a female for the first time in my life, which I found very intriguing. So this was my feminine self. Me dressed up in digital drag. Pretty hot, if you ask me. Seeing myself as someone else, as a different part of my soul, unleashed a lot of emotions I hadn't felt for years, and therefore hadn't expressed, neither in life nor music. The artificial projection worked as a key to unlock my shadow. And now that I knew her face, I could finally get to know her, like my imagined character had always done. A recurring dream. I find myself inside a concert venue. Sometimes this is an actual venue that I have visited or played at, sometimes not. To the right side of the stage, there is a back door. I enter and find myself in a corridor leading to an empty room. The room is heated and has no windows and feels claustrophobic. There is a small open door in the wall on the left side of the room. Leaning through the door, I see a ladder leading further downwards to another room underground. I climb down the ladder and find myself in an even smaller, warmer, and more claustrophobic space. There is a small table and 2 chairs in the middle of this room, and I can sense that someone have just been sitting in one of the chairs. Sometimes there are traces, like a recently smoked cigarette lying in an ashtray sat on the table, or crumbs left by someone who just ate their lunch there. At the end of this room, a small sound studio is rigged up against the wall, a mixing desk with a speaker on each side. I walk over to the speakers and I look behind them, as if to find another layer, but I find that there is nothing there. There must be another source behind closed doors, lost in the noise, beyond duality, beyond understanding, a pure source of creation, with no intention, no prejudice, no bias, unknowingly at play with the universe. In the Tarot deck, the Fool card is numbered 0, which is considered to be a number of infinite potential. Consider him a blank slate, for the Fool has yet to develop a clear personality. He is the symbol of innocence. His journey to come will shape his character yet. I just couldn't get rid of the feeling that there had to be more to explore, even though I now had my yin and yang archetypes to play with. The urge to look beyond duality eventually made me decide to create a third character. And again, I turned to symbolism and found my character in the Fool. This personality template was childlike, explorative, and unaware of consequences. Just what I needed. So I made a third version of myself, who never approached a life in music, but rather settled down in his early 20s as a family man working as an electrician. In that way, he was stripped of all the musical skills I had built up through a decades-long career as a music producer. And I would be able to make music through the medium of a pure creative soul. I let him live his life in the confines of a narrow cage, in a rather sad, loveless, and purely practical relationship, with strict personal boundaries and no room for creativity or passion. My worst nightmare. And I assigned his partner with all the yang energy to see what happened if the normative idea of this dynamic between man and woman was flipped on its head. A cold, practical, strict, and insensitive partner. Poor guy. But then I rewarded him with a rather unavoidable, massive midlife crisis. When he was in his early 50s, coincidentally the same age as I was at the time of writing, I fed him strange visions and even stranger dreams, to the point where he collapsed and broke out of all the barriers that had kept him at bay. He was now totally moldable to become a true explorer, a reset man. I let him go up into his attic and dust off the old synthesizer he had kept since his teenage years, when he had tried to dabble with music, mostly out of his interest in electronics. And before I knew it, he too had a music career. The main thing to understand is that we are imprisoned in some kind of work of art. It's a quote by the wonderful Terence McKenna. The role-playing that emerged through the writing of the stories of the three different me's in parallel timelines allowed me to escape any fixed ideas of who I was or what I could do as an artist. I even began selecting different wardrobes every morning before going to the studio to work on new music, in order to correspond to what one of the three different personalities would wear that particular day. Some of these mental spaces created by acting out my aliases opened up for more experimentation, while others allowed me to leave ideas alone before I totally decomposed perfectly usable pieces of music in search of making them more interesting. As this process went on, I soon found myself with three different artist careers. I was now releasing new music under my old alias, Mental Overdrive, but I also produced and released music under the guises Neon Teardrops and Waveform. All three projects resonating in different ways with different audiences. A synth pop single with a fake copyright dated 1987 suddenly went top 10 in the German alternative charts. A new ambient experimental project opened up doors to a very different audience than my former projects had ever resonated with. And still people were dancing to my beats in dark clubs around the world. This public response triggered new ideas for the continued writing of my stories, which in turn inspired writing new music, and everything turned into a huge feedback loop of creativity. The text work, Pyramids on the Moon, now subtitled A Multidimensional Autobiography, was posted online as new chapters were written, and social media was used to share individual works without connecting all the pieces together. The story so far was also printed as a 3-part book series designed by Lasse Marhaug. I continued to explore the new technology that came my way during the research period, and I linked both photography, video works, and NFTs to the project. Again, without explaining much of what the main project was, and that this was part of it. Some of these visual works fed back into other parts of the project and ended up as record sleeves or illustrations for the storytelling. It's complicated. I had my born-again electrician build a sound massage bench in order to explore how people responded to being physically exposed to different frequencies directly on their bodies. A device that took up the initial intent of my research project, investigating the physicality of sound. This was a task he was perfect to be the medium to carry out, as he was far more open and unbiased than the other two, less critical to that kind of material. After 3 years, I had released a fair body of music, written a great deal, and made several visual works and installations that were all presented in an exhibition at a rented pop-up space in downtown Tromsø, baptized Helvetes Veita-senteret. The exhibition was titled The Search for Resonance and summed up the artistic works created in this project. But there is another outcome of this work, which I find both more surprising and much more interesting. The search for resonance also turned out to be a story of personal transformation, triggered by my artistic toolbox. It ended up about putting back the pieces of a lost male identity. An identity I was born with and which blossomed in my youth, but got more and more crushed as I grew older, either by external pressure from social constructs and dogmas, or the expected role-playing of traditional family life, or just by myself. In any way, I stand here now transformed. I have learned that breaking up the boundaries of a fixed identity can both give new creative results, but also give new insight into the depths of one's psyche. I'm still a man, and happy to be one. But I am now conscious of the potential of the inner duality that I contain as a human being. And I'm free to oscillate wildly between these two polarities in order to experience life more fully, in order to express myself in a more complete way, with a deeper understanding of both sides of the psychic gender coin and everything in between. So do I need a new tag for my new identity in a world that creates definitions for everything under the sun? Am I now a non-binary soul comfortably living in a male body? Am I left with a pronoun challenge? Have I become a they? I personally don't mind any tag, but I think new pronouns are not mine to claim. I believe they belong to others whose personal transformation needs to be understood, respected, embraced, and nurtured by a society that should strive for true diversity. There is gold at the end of the rainbow. A few years ago, I decided to read a children's book about the human body to my beloved, unfiltered daughter. The opening line of the first chapter was, "The human body consists of many different parts." Whereupon she immediately cut me off and said, "Dad, the human body is whole unless you cut it up in pieces." We never read that book. So I'm going to stick with I, but maybe a new, more complete I, in a trinity of spirit, supported by both the masculine and the feminine. As ancient symbolism might have suggested was a good idea all along. Maybe a more balanced human being, striving to become holistic. But maybe we need a definition of a new male. In an age when men seem to struggle more than ever with who they are and what their role in a rapidly changing society should be. I see a lot of new males among the younger generations these days. You got this. As for my own generation, oof. Ooh, there's a lot of work to do. I also see a lot more gender fluidity among children nowadays, when they are not too conditioned into restricting themselves at a young age. Boys Don't Cry is not only a great song by The Cure, but it was the mantra of my generation, to great effect. The biggest emotional breakdown that I had for a couple of decades was when Steve Jobs died. True story. Okay, so I think it's long overdue that we said goodbye to the stubborn old male of this world before he destroys us all. The angry alpha clinging to power, masculinity gone wrong, his function obsolete. And to my fellow males out there who might find this a bit challenging or even threatening to their own identity, you won't lose your precious maleness if you embrace the feminine side of yourself or your inner child. You will only become more understanding of the mechanisms that have created the imbalance this world is struggling with. You will probably get a deeper understanding of feminism. You will probably get a better understanding of the struggles of those whose gender identity fit no fixed social compartment. You will probably also understand your children better, and those whose society sought in the rather stigmatizing drawer of neurodiversity. But you will have to use your masculinity to stand up for parts of yourself that have been lying in hiding, in fear of being hurt. Enhance your emotional side rather than fight it. And you will want the same for others. And just so you don't start confusing questions of gender identity with sexuality, as a lot of people seem to do in the general gender and trans discussion. This is not about sexuality. It's on another level. So, if there are any alpha males out there who can feel a slight tint of homophobia rising with their testosterone, chill, bro. Your sexuality is most probably safe, even if you should be brave enough to embrace your feminine self. And if you have some new revelations, so what? For heaven's sake, embrace that too. The new world is free, and the old world is dying around us as we speak. And with it, the predators who have made us suffocate for so long. And on that note, making this even more personal, as I cannot take responsibility for anyone but myself or speak for other men, I want to take this opportunity to apologize to those I have hurt. Whenever I've lost my way and been responsible for my own toxic behavior as a man, or exploited the privilege I was born into because of my biological appearance. For this, I am truly, truly sorry. I wear black today. Not only because I rediscovered synth music, and not only because I think I look cool, but as a symbolic gesture to mark the death of the old male. May he rest as peacefully as he possibly can. I was invited here today to defend myself. I'm no stranger to defense. But standing here in this context, I don't feel a need to defend myself at all, or defend my work. It is what it is, and it speaks for itself. I am as surprised as anyone about how this project developed from its early phase up to the results that I present today. But my job was just to follow the flow, not direct it. In the context of my findings, I want to say a few words about the academic framework that I've operated within over these 3 years, and about the expectations that I possibly have failed to meet. It's actually a rant. I think this particular institution took a calculated risk when admitting me to the program, with no formal credentials, no formal education. You were brave. But if you invite the forces of chaos into your house, don't expect it to be left tidy. So instead of defending myself, I'm going to defend the following. In the very beginning of this journey, it was suggested that the goal of this program was to use artistic processes as research tools. It was presented as an alternative way to look at any chosen subject matter from a different angle than through the empirical dissection and intellectual structuring of information usually associated with research. But as my project developed, the program itself gradually morphed into a more academically orientated framework, something I believe was required for the transition into making it worthy a PhD title. And I started questioning, who's really in charge here? For the first time in my creative life, I found myself within the confines of an institution, peeking into a world of structure and hierarchy, in progress, but still built on the remains of an old form. A pyramid-shaped, power construct, resembling the structure of capitalism, resembling the structure of male dominance, resembling the structure of racial dominance. Yet another structure of ancient masculinity, where free creative flow and individual diversity could easily suffocate if not protected. And sometimes a rather hostile place for the feminine. The academic institutions are considered the temples of the brain, with the priesthood bearing high status in society. The brain is a great tool, but it is neither particularly sexy, nor passionate, nor surprising. It's a tool to understand what happened, not a tool to decide what's allowed to happen. The brain shouldn't be left in charge, but stand back and let the creative processes work in peace. It should be supportive and let impulses flourish in all their chaos and then try and analyze the results in hindsight. You simply cannot think out of the box, because thinking is the box. You need to sense and act outside of the box, and then think about what you've just done. Likewise, the mandate of the institutions catering for these creative processes is not to be too suggestive in which way they should move or define their range of operation, judge their value, or instigate insecurity by massing on about lack of order or higher expectations, and thereby strangle the flow. Lucky for me, it's a rant, I told you. I already had a black belt in being myself before entering this program. And I usually do as I do, not as I'm told. But if I had been someone without this kind of confidence, things might have looked different. A creative soul could easily get crushed when faced with the kind of academic pressure the new development of the program represents. And in that prospect, I want to give the following warning to the creative institutions by rephrasing Oscar Wilde. Be careful so you don't kill the thing you love. Artistic processes need to flow freely. That's when you unleash their true power. That's when art can unlock secrets, reveal new understanding. Artistic research leans on the strengths of academic no-no words like intuition, emotion, distraction, whims, folly, and fun. It requires you to become liquid and abandon analysis and dissection until the time is right to try and understand what you just did. And even then, you have to respect that some things can't be explained, only felt. If artistic research is going to have any value in the future, it has to continue being its own definition, artistic research. And the task of the institution must be to be dynamic enough to change and offer what is required to nurture these processes at any given time. So don't screw this up, guys. No more rants. With that out of the way, I am very grateful for the opportunities and resources offered me over my 3 years as a research fellow. I'm grateful for the wonderful people I've met, the forums, the discussions, the fun, and hey, thanks for funding my midlife crisis. Dear committee, I am sorry if I have misled you into believing that this project was about music. And I apologize for not responding to your requests for lists of which kind of music equipment I use for my different aliases, or lack of references to other similar music projects. But the core of this project was never music. Music was only one of many artistic research tools used. This was all about transformation, artistic and personal. Sometimes you go looking for your lost keys and you end up finding your lost wallet. As for the future, I will continue working with the aftermath of this project, now that I'm back in the open field. I will follow all the white rabbits and never be afraid to enter the black holes they lead me into. I will just see where they take me. I will probably continue to make music under various guises and write my stories and whatnot. And if you add everything up, it might show you who I am and even tell you something about yourself. And I will try to understand and show respect for the feminine in any form, and the more sensible version of the masculine, and the child. So there you have it. This is the real outcome of my search for resonance. Whether or not it fits the academic framework that spawned it is not the most relevant thing now. After all, university degrees are not works of art, but they are badges of status in an old hierarchy that might have to take a closer look at itself, as we all do. And meanwhile, art will thrive anywhere it is free to breathe, free to explore, like love. And love is, as we all know, above all. Thank you.